What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Aram, once again coming through with the $10 donation via the PayPal. And he asks a question. And it's a very interesting question. It's which player has had a greater impact on today's game, Pete Maravich or Stephen Curry? Now, I know I have this perception of being like this Curry hater, which isn't true. It's just that I push back on the notion that he's a top 4, top 5 player. I just think that's ridiculous. I think he's more along the lines of top 15-ish, maybe. Maybe even top 20. I'll put him in that range, but top 10 to me, that's just outlandish. Because it's too many times, for instance, that he's won a championship and he wasn't even Finals MVP. Can't have that. We can't nullify Bill Russell for having help and most likely not being Finals MVP and maybe even half of the championships that he's won or did win. But then we ignore these things when it comes to Steph Curry. I mean, even a role player won Finals MVP over Steph Curry in 2015. But there's no denying Steph Curry's impact on today's game. Now, even though I believe that analytics has had more to do with the changes in today's game than anything else, I think the rule changes that predated Steph Curry's arrival, because we got to remember, even though a person like myself, I know Jesse Gladsack is another guy, subscribe to me, and some others, we liked the defensive NBA of the late 90s and early 2000s. We liked the 81-79 final scores. We liked the emphasis on physicality and defense. Because that type of basketball, in my opinion, forced the best players to be the primary score, to be the league's primary scorers. You had to be a guy with a multifaceted game. You just couldn't be a shooter. You couldn't just have one or two go-to moves and average 30 points a game. I mean, goodness, James Harden averaged 36 points a game primarily with 3 moves, which was his step back 3, right? Drives the basket, where drives the basket, right? We initiate contact, and tricks to bail, tricks to force the officials to make calls. You couldn't do that 20 years ago. It wouldn't have worked. But anyway, I'm digressing a lot. That and the rule changes plus analytics, I think, had more to do with the changes that started in basketball 10 years ago. Now, having said all of that, there's no doubt about it that Steph Curry's game, Steph Curry's impact, has had a definite impact on the younger generation of players. They don't remember, the Spurs dynasty or these younger guys. All they know is Steph Curry. Matter of fact, with each passing generation, or each passing year, I should say, not generation, each passing year, I would argue that Steph Curry has more of an impact on younger players than LeBron does. I think that younger guys, 16, 15, 14, people in middle school and high school, I would argue that they identify more with Steph Curry than LeBron James. And that's why I think Steph is way up there in their eyes, because that's what they know. That's what they see. All these other guys that we, talk about, that's ancient history to them. But Steph Curry is the guy that most people today associate with today's game. the emphasis on three-point shot. Um, Various ways in shooting the three, not just spotting up and shooting threes as three-point specialists did back in the 80s and into the 90s, but being a great skilled player, a ball handler, multifaceted game, but embedded in that game is, in most players today, good to great three-point shooting. I mean, it's to the point now where, look, back in the 80s, virtually none of your great scorers outside of Bird really had three-point range. Matter of fact, most of them didn't even shoot threes. Bernard King was one of your best scorers. Adrian Dantley, Alex English, young Michael Jordan, young Dominique Wilkins. Gervin, for the most part, even though he would shoot a little bit more than them, the other ones, they didn't shoot threes. But by the 1990s, especially as these guys got older, you had to expand your game. And by the 90s, the three-point shot became more important. And a lot of these guys that got older, they expanded their games to three-point territory. But Steph Curry's on another level. Steph Curry is a guy that we had never seen before to be able to shoot from the range that he shoots and the different type of difficult shots that he can take and has mastered and to shoot at such a high percentage. We have never seen that before. So if you're talking about today's game, the perception is of these two, Steph Curry has had the far greater impact. But is that reality? Well, if you're talking about today's game, then yeah, Steph Curry has had a greater impact than Pete Maravich, because a lot of these guys don't really know who Pete Maravich was. But this is why I say Pete Maravich has had a greater impact on today's game than people think or would know, because they don't talk about history on these sports shows. Pete Maravich was the first quote-unquote big guard in the NBA, at least the first prominent big guard. Now, Grant, mind you, you had Oscar Robertson, 6'5", 225, true, but he was a point guard. Maravich was 6'5", possibly 6'6" in shoes, 205, 210. At that time, most guards were 6'3" and under. So this is a thing that he ushered in. Bigger guards, players who may have been small forwards in prior generations now are becoming ball handlers. Plus, he was, at the time, the most skilled ball handler the game had seen. This is a guy been working on his game since he was what? A toddler, or not toddler, but at least 3, 4, 5 years old. This guy had a basketball in his hand. So we had never seen that type of wizardry in basketball. Now, of course, he went to college, where he set the all-time scoring record, which is probably about to be broken by Caitlin Clark very, very soon. 3,667 points. Though, to be fair, Caitlin Clark has had an extra season to break it, and they play more college games now. And their three-point shot and all of that. But, so Pete Maravich was well known for his groundbreaking game, the passing, the ball wizardry, the showmanship. This was something that the conservative NBA was forced to change some of their rules. Pete Maravich, if he had came to the NBA a few years earlier, he would have been called for palming and so many different violations, double dribble and all this type of stuff. So the NBA had to lighten or liberalize their very strict ball handling rules. So a guy like Pete Maravich could flourish in the NBA. And they had to do that, because had they not done that, then Pete Maravich might have been forced to go to the ABA. And that would have been a very bad thing for the NBA to lose all those guys to the ABA. And then, who knows? how that would have worked out. Another thing is that with Pete Maravich, you didn't see a guy that was a guard like him, except for Jerry West, I guess, that was what you would call a combo guard. You know, a guy that could play either the shooting guard or point guard position. And, most point guards were strictly point guards. Most point guards were strictly pass-orientated players. Maravich was a great primary scorer, but he could also facilitate. He could pass. Sometimes, other players couldn't really catch up with him. They didn't exactly know when he was going to pass the ball because he was so unpredictable sometimes in the fast break situation. But he was exciting to watch. Another thing about Pete Maravich that we didn't see before is compared to other players in his era, we didn't really see a guy with that type of range before, consistently. Like, Pete Maravich would take a lot of shots, even though a lot of his shots were mid-range. For the era, he took quite a few what we would call threes. They didn't have a three-point line then. Some of the shots he took were pretty deep, 25 to 30 feet. All right? Now, I'm not saying he shot consistently from the logo, but he shot from range that we didn't normally see at that time. So when I'm talking about all these different things, showmanship, ball handling, shooting, scoring, range, these are things that are relevant today. So there are many players who have taken what Pete Maravich did and have updated and modernized and evolved it to the point where, yeah, you could say Pete Maravich still to this day, even though it's becoming fainter and fainter with each year that he is, since he passed away at the much too young age of 40 back in January '88, he still has an impact on today's game. Now, also, I must have to add, Pete Maravich did not have the career that Steph Curry had. He didn't win one championship, let alone 4. He didn't win 2 league MVPs, let alone 1. He doesn't have the honors. He only went to 26 playoff games. So he did not have the NBA career that Steph Curry had. So overall, I have to give the nod to Steph Curry. Steph Curry has had a greater impact on today's game than probably, than anybody's playing right now, including LeBron James. We're talking about today's game, the way it's played. Curry's had the greatest impact. Matter of fact, I would say that Steph Curry is probably the most impactful ball player that we've seen since Allen Iverson. So that's pretty much my take on this. If you're talking about today's game, who's been more impactful between the two, you got to give it to Steph Curry. If you're talking about for their respective eras, however, Pete Maravich in the 70s and Steph in his era, and then what followed, then that's a whole different debate. It's a whole different debate. But the game definitely changed under Pete Maravich. The game was a lot more conservative, and then it became a game that some people didn't like, to be honest with you. Some people thought that Pete Maravich, he came from Louisiana. Some people thought Pete's game was a little bit, how some people thought. They thought his game was a little bit too street. But they used to say the same thing about Bob Cousy. So a lot of people don't understand when they make fun of Bob Cousy. Bob Cousy grew up around black kids. So he played against black kids. So that's why Bob Cousy's game looks so foreign when you look at 1950 highlight reels. When you look at 50s highlight reels and you look at Bob Cousy and you look at how everybody else is playing at that time and you look at Cousy, it looks out of place. That's what made Cousy so remarkable for his time, because nobody else was playing like that. But anyway, that's all I got to say on this one. Tell me what you guys think.